What happens when a sharp-tongued talk show host challenges a powerhouse entrepreneur? A battle of words that proves some voices can't be silenced. In today's video, watch as one woman takes on tough questions and makes her mark, leaving a lasting impact. On Live TV, Ava Thompson's response left everyone speechless. Ava Thompson was no ordinary entrepreneur. At just 29, she had built a thriving business empire from the ground up, one that didn't just support her success, but also empowered countless others in her community. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, Ava firmly believed that her achievements meant little if they didn't help others rise as well. Her latest venture, a pioneering initiative aimed at giving young Black women access to mentorship and entrepreneurial resources, was her heart and soul. So when she received an invitation to appear on The Morning Focus, one of the top-rated talk shows in the nation, Ava was ecstatic. It was the perfect opportunity to share the incredible stories of the young women her initiative was helping, and to show the world just what could be accomplished with hard work, passion, and a strong support system. The host, Rachel Steele, was a well-known figure in the media, infamous for her biting comments and controversial opinions. Rachel was both highly regarded and widely criticized, a mix that made her interviews unpredictable. Ava, however, wasn't fazed. She'd faced challenges much tougher than a sharp-tongued interviewer. This was her moment, and she was ready to make it count. On the day of the interview, Ava walked into the studio in New York City, dressed in a bold emerald green suit that reflected her energetic spirit. The makeup artist couldn't help but praise how radiant she looked, but Ava was focused on the bigger picture, her mission, and the opportunity ahead. She looked around, and Ava smiled her nerves just beneath the surface as she stepped onto the brightly lit set. She took a deep breath, taking in the buzzing studio filled with production staff, cameras, and the soft murmur of the audience. Rachel, sitting in her usual spot, flashed Ava a wide grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ava Thompson, ladies and gentlemen," Rachel announced to the applause of the live audience. "A self-made businesswoman who says she's rewriting the rules of entrepreneurship. Ava, welcome." Ava leaned into the introduction with her trademark poise, flashing her warm, confident smile. "Thank you, Rachel. I'm so happy to be here and to share a bit about the work we're doing." The first few minutes were pleasant. Ava explained her journey from a teenager selling handmade jewelry at local markets to owning a multi-million-dollar company. Rachel nodded, listening intently, occasionally cutting in with questions. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet. Still, Ava couldn't shake a subtle shift in Rachel's tone as the conversation moved toward her community-focused initiative. The compliments started to sound just a bit backhanded. "So, Ava," Rachel said, tilting her head in that exaggeratedly curious way she was famous for, "do you think programs like yours are necessary because people aren't working hard enough on their own?" The air in the room thickened ever so slightly. Ava paused, her calm demeanor unchanged. "Well, Rachel," she began, "it's not about people not working hard enough. It's about recognizing the systemic barriers that exist and creating pathways for others to thrive despite those barriers." Her answer was met with polite applause from the audience, but Rachel's grin only widened, as though she had been waiting for an opening like this. Ava had no idea just how far Rachel was willing to take it. But little did Ava know, the interview was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. Rachel leaned forward in her chair, her fingers tapping on the glossy surface of the table. "I hear you," she said with a nod that felt more rehearsed than sincere. "But don't you think focusing on systemic barriers can sometimes sound like an excuse? I mean, plenty of people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? Isn't that what the American dream is all about?" The audience murmured softly. Some clapped, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ava noticed a few furrowed brows among the crowd, but she kept her cool. She had been here before, maybe not on national television, but in classrooms, boardrooms, and even family gatherings. where the same rhetoric was tossed around like an unshakable truth. She smiled calm, yet resolute. "Rachel," Ava began, "the idea of the American dream is beautiful in theory, but it doesn't account for the fact that some people have more hurdles to jump than others. A pair of boots is great, but what if those boots don't have laces? Or worse, what if they've been stolen before you even get a chance to wear them?" Laughter and applause erupted from a section of the audience, and Ava seized the moment. "What my program does is give people their laces back. It doesn't tie their shoes for them, but it makes sure they have what they need to take the first step." Rachel's smile tightened. Her eyes darted toward the producers behind the cameras, as if silently strategizing her next move. Ava had scored a point, but Rachel wasn't about to back down. "Well," Rachel said, her voice syrupy but with a slight edge, "that's a clever analogy, but some might say that focusing so much on race and inequality just creates more division. Don't you think we should be focusing on unity instead of pointing out differences?" Ava tilted her head, her expression thoughtful but her words deliberate. "Unity sounds great," she said, "but it's hard to build a bridge without first acknowledging the river you're trying to cross. Ignoring differences doesn't make them go away, it just leaves people stranded on opposite shores." Another wave of applause rippled through the audience, louder this time. Even Rachel seemed momentarily taken aback, her polished facade cracking for just a fraction of a second. But she quickly recovered, her tone turning more pointed. "That's fair," she conceded, "but let's talk specifics. Your program is targeted specifically at young black women. Why not open it up to everyone? Isn't that exclusionary?" Ava felt a small twinge of irritation, but she didn't let it show. This question wasn't new. She had been asked it dozens of times before, often by people who didn't understand or didn't want to understand the importance of tailored solutions for marginalized communities. "It's not exclusionary," Ava said, her voice steady. "It's intentional. When you know where the gaps are, you address them directly. If a house has a leak in the roof, you don't fix the whole house. You start where the problem is. My program is about addressing a very specific need, and by doing that, we're lifting up entire communities." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Ava could feel the energy shifting in her favor. But Rachel wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if preparing for the next round. "Well," Rachel said, her voice tinged with a mix of skepticism and faux curiosity, "I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but some might say programs like yours promote dependency. How do you respond to that?" Ava raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of a smile playing on her lips. She knew exactly what Rachel was doing, pushing buttons, stirring the pot, but she wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of losing her composure. Even as Ava held her ground, the tension in the room was reaching a boiling point. Her smile remained firmly in place, but her gaze sharpened, locking onto Rachel with laser focus. The host's words had done their job. They'd ruffled feathers not just in the audience, but within Ava herself. Still, Ava had no intention of letting Rachel dictate the narrative. "Dependency?" Ava repeated, her voice calm but edged with quiet strength. "Let me ask you something, Rachel. When banks give out loans to help new businesses get started, is that promoting dependency, or is it providing resources to people who are trying to grow and succeed?" Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Ava wasn't done. "Because that's what this program does. It's an investment. It's giving young women the tools they need to stand on their own, to create opportunities not just for themselves, but for others. Dependency isn't the problem here. Lack of opportunity is." The audience erupted into applause, louder this time. The applause was more sustained this time, and even a few members of the production crew behind the cameras were nodding along. Rachel's polished facade began to crack just a little more. She adjusted her posture, crossing her legs tightly, and tilted her head in a way that seemed more defensive than inquisitive. "Well, Ava," Rachel said, her voice now slightly clipped, "you make a good point. But surely you understand why some people feel left out when programs are so narrowly focused. We're living in a time when everyone wants to feel included, don't you think? Ava's smile faded slightly, not out of frustration, but out of quiet determination. She leaned forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "Rachel," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "Inclusion is important, but it doesn't mean ignoring the unique challenges that some groups face. If a child is struggling in school, you don't hold the entire class back so that everyone feels the same. You give that child the extra support they need so they can catch up. And when they do, guess what? The entire classroom benefits." There was a beat of silence in the studio, the kind of silence that felt heavy charged with the weight of something undeniable. But Rachel wasn't ready to back down. She smirked, leaning back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with the kind of challenge that had made her infamous. "Interesting perspective," she said, but then added, "But let me ask you this. Ava, do you think focusing so much on race might actually, perpetuate division? Don't you think it would be better to just focus on what unites us?" Ava's lips parted slightly, but before she could answer, Rachel pressed on. Some might say programs like yours are just another form of segregation. Isn't that ironic?" The words hung in the air like smoke. The audience gasped audibly, and a few people even shook their heads in disbelief. For the first time, Ava let a flicker of emotion cross her face, something between incredulity and exasperation. She glanced toward the audience as if drawing strength from their visible reactions, before turning her full attention back to Rachel. "What's ironic," Ava said slowly, her voice now carrying the weight of something deeply personal, "is how people will twist the idea of equity into something it's not." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Ava didn't give her a chance. Segregation was about exclusion, about denying people access. What I'm doing is the opposite. I'm opening doors that were slammed shut for generations. She paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "And you know what's really ironic? The fact that when people like me try to fix the damage done by those systems, we're accused of being divisive. But the truth is," Ava continued, "we can't fix a problem if we refuse to acknowledge it exists." The audience broke into thunderous applause, some even standing to their feet. Rachel's expression froze for a split second, before she quickly composed herself, plastering on a strained smile. But just when it seemed like Ava had delivered the final blow, Rachel took things one step further, escalating the tension to a breaking point. Rachel sat back, her face composed, but her eyes betraying a flicker of frustration. She had underestimated Ava. The audience's roaring applause had shifted the room's energy, and for a moment, it was clear Rachel was scrambling to regain control of the narrative. "Well, Ava," Rachel began, her tone smooth but with a sharp edge, "you seem to have an answer for everything, but let's be real for a moment. There are people out there, hardworking, struggling people, who might look at what you're doing and wonder, what about us? How do you justify leaving them behind? How is that fair?" Ava blinked, surprised not by the question, but by its blatant attempt to paint her as the villain. Her jaw tightened briefly, just enough for anyone paying close attention to notice. Then, just as quickly, her expression softened, replaced with a calm determination that made it clear she wasn't rattled. She leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of clarity and resolve. "Fair," Ava repeated, the word coming out with quiet, deliberate power. "Rachel, let me ask you this. When a firefighter puts out a burning house, do we accuse them of being unfair to the houses that aren't on fire, or do we praise them for saving the one that's in danger?" "We thank them for protecting the neighborhood," Ava said calmly. The studio fell silent, not the uncomfortable kind of silence, but the kind that pulls everyone to the edge of their seats. Even the crew members standing behind the cameras stopped what they were doing, their eyes fixed on Ava. "That's what this program is," Ava continued, her tone unwavering. "It's about putting out fires. It's about addressing the specific needs of people who've been ignored, overlooked, and underserved for far too long. And when we lift them up, when we give them a chance to thrive, it doesn't take anything away from anyone else. It adds to the community as a whole. Rachel opened her mouth as if to respond, but Ava raised a hand not rudely, but firmly enough to let Rachel know she wasn't finished. "And let's not pretend," Ava added, her voice now carrying the weight of years of experience, "that these conversations about fairness are ever really about fairness. Because when we talk about fairness, what we're really talking about is comfort. Whose comfort are we protecting? Whose discomfort are we willing to ignore? And if addressing injustice makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe that's a discomfort we should all learn to live with." The audience exploded. The clapping, cheering, and standing ovations weren't just loud, they were deafening. Ava sat back in her chair, her composure intact, but her eyes revealed the fire burning inside her. She had said her piece, and she knew it had landed exactly where it needed to. Rachel, on the other hand, was visibly flustered. Her carefully crafted image of control had started to crack. Rachel fumbled for her water glass, taking a quick sip before forcing a laugh. "Well, Ava," she said, her voice slightly strained, "you're certainly passionate. I can see why your program has so many supporters. But let me ask you." Ava cut her off politely but firmly. "Before you ask me anything else." "Rachel," Ava said, leaning forward. The shift in energy was palpable. The audience leaned forward with her. "When you hear stories about people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, do you ever stop to ask who made the boots in the first place? And who decided which ones were worth investing in?" Rachel froze. The question wasn't just rhetorical, it was surgical, cutting straight to the core of the narrative she'd been pushing. The audience was silent again, but this time it wasn't for Ava to finish, it was for Rachel, who clearly had no answer. As Ava's words echoed through the studio, what happened next made it clear that this moment would be remembered far beyond this one interview. For what felt like a lifetime, Rachel sat there, her usually sharp tongue utterly still. Her practiced composure faltered as her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing the awkward pause while Ava sat calmly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression a picture of grace under fire. The audience was electric. Whispers and murmurs buzzed through the crowd like static before someone finally yelled, "Say it louder." The room erupted into laughter and applause. Ava smiled warmly, the moment hers to own. Rachel finally managed to stammer out a response. "Well, Ava, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on some points," she said, her voice tight, her usual confidence now replaced with strained civility. "But I do appreciate your perspective." Ava didn't miss a beat. "And I appreciate the opportunity to share it," she replied, her tone polite yet firm, a masterclass in grace under pressure. The producers cut to commercial, but by then, the damage had been done. The live audience was buzzing, their reactions spilling onto social media before the cameras even stopped rolling. The hashtags #Ava Thompson and #MorningFocus began trending within minutes, with clips of Ava's sharp responses being shared across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. "She said what needed to be said," one tweet declared, racking up thousands of likes. Another video clip, captioned, "Putting out fires, not ignoring them," was quickly reposted by influencers, activists, and even a few celebrities. Backstage, Ava sat in her dressing room, taking a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, texts from friends, emails from supporters, and tags from strangers praising her eloquence and courage. She scrolled briefly, her heart swelling as she read messages from young women thanking her for her words. But the moment wasn't without its detractors. Some commenters accused her of being divisive, claiming she was too aggressive or not fair. Ava had seen it all before, though. She knew these criticisms weren't about her tone or tactics. They were about her refusal to shrink herself to make others more comfortable. and she had no intention of apologizing for that. Later that evening, as she sat in her hotel room overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Ava reflected on the day. The interview had been challenging, sure, but it had also been an opportunity to speak truth to power. She thought about the young women her program was helping, girls who might one day watch that interview and see a reflection of themselves in her strength, resilience, and unapologetic authenticity. Her assistant knocked on the door, poking her head in with a smile. "You're everywhere right now," she said. CNN just picked up the story. They're calling it one of the most powerful live TV moments of the year. Ava smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about the message." Her assistant nodded, holding up Ava's phone. "Still, you might want to see this. Beyoncé just shared the clip." Ava laughed, the weight of the day briefly lifting. "Well," she said, "I guess I can't argue with Queen Bee." The buzz surrounding the interview didn't die down for weeks. News outlets dissected the moment, think pieces debated its impact, and social media continued to amplify Ava's words. But for Ava, it wasn't about the headlines or the viral clips. It was about the impact of the attention. Instead, her mind was already racing with the next steps, how to use this momentum to push her program forward, how to amplify the voices of the women she was working so hard to support. By noon, she was back in her hometown, greeted by a group of young women from her program who had been waiting at the community center. One of them, a 19-year-old named Aliyah, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Miss Ava," she said softly, clutching her phone, "I watched the interview last night." Ava smiled gently, but Aliyah wasn't finished. "Here's the thing," she said, her voice steady but full of passion. "The world isn't always going to hand you respect or fairness. Sometimes you'll have to demand it. Sometimes you'll have to fight for it. And when that happens, I want you to remember one thing. Your story, your voice, and your worth are not up for debate. Ever." The room was silent, but it was a silence filled with understanding and determination. Ava could see it in their faces. These young women were ready to take on the world. "Believing in yourself isn't always easy," Ava said, her voice steady yet filled with conviction. "It's not always the comfortable path, but it's the one that's necessary. Whether you're standing on a national stage or just in your own community, remember this: your voice has the power to ignite change. Don't let the fear of discomfort or criticism hold you back from sharing your truth." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. If Ava's journey resonated with you, I encourage you to take a moment today. Think about how you can create impact in your own corner of the world. Maybe it's mentoring someone who needs a guiding hand, launching a new project, or simply standing firm for what's right. Your actions, no matter how small they seem, have the potential to shape the future.